today I would like to see if I can knit and chat at the same time. I'm not exactly certain of my capabilities in that department, so we'll see how this goes. I would like to share a bit about what items I have for knitting, because I'm more of a minimalist and I see a lot of people on social media who have huge rooms filled with yarn, who have many matching interchangeable needle sets, who have pretty Etsy stitch markers and handmade project bags, and all of that is great, it looks very fun. It's just not what I have, and I feel like sometimes it's a bit overwhelming for people who are starting out with knitting and are unsure what to get, or for people who just don't have the budget to spend on all of these things. And even for people who would like to maybe try out some of them but aren't sure what's worth to get. I would just like to, I don't know if I want to say guidelines, it's just me, so I'm gonna give my opinions on what is worth getting, what is an essential, what is maybe a bit of an extra. While I do all that, I am knitting a swatch. This is for my ribbling sweater, which is a design by 𝗙𝗛𝗡 that I am test knitting. So that's very exciting, and my yarn for it just arrived, so obviously I immediately had to cast on the swatch. This is Drops Daisy, which I have somehow never worked with before. I've worked with quite a lot of Drops yarns, but somehow I haven't gotten to the most basic one yet. I got the dark brown color, which I understand is a new edition, and I ordered it from a shop in the Netherlands called Let's Knit, and the shop is run by Linda. And Linda is very, very cute because I accidentally got my address wrong on the order, and she managed to change it while the order was still pretty much being sent out. And she also sent me tea with my order, which I thought was very cute. So shout out to Linda. For the video, I'm gonna chat a little bit about needles first, because I feel like that's the most complicated part to do when you're a beginner, to figure out what needles to get. I'm going to chat a little bit about yarn, I'm going to talk about patterns, and I'm going to talk about all of the fun little notions you can keep around. So let's get started. Okay, I did the cast on, so I'm hoping that's all the counting I have to do for this. This is 2x2 broken rib, which is not something I've ever done before, but seems easy enough. For the topic of needles, when you start out with knitting, a lot of people will tell you to get an interchangeable needle set, and that is also what I did. It's not a bad recommendation. I would say if you're like a very beginner and you're doing your first ever project and you just want to see if you like knitting and if it's for you, just go to the store and pick up one needle, a circular one in a reasonable size for whatever project you are wanting to do. It's probably something like a hat or a scarf. You probably don't need a bunch of different cable lengths or needle sizes for it. So just to see if you like it, you can just get one needle. I've also found that a lot of thrift stores will carry needles, and also that a lot of people have knitting needles at home because at some point they knitted themselves. So you can maybe also ask around in your friend group or family if anybody has some you can borrow. So for starting out, maybe don't get the interchangeable needle set first thing. If you try it out and you decide you want to stick with it, I do recommend getting an interchangeable needle set because I feel like it is the most economical decision. It is also the decision I made when I started knitting, and I kind of regret that decision because I bought a very cheap interchangeable needle set. This is the one I have. I got it from Amazon, and it comes in a bunch of sizes. The sizes don't go down very far, which is a problem I ran into pretty quickly. And my main problem with it was actually the cable, because it is very stiff and kind of rough, and it keeps unscrewing from the needle. So when you're buying an interchangeable needle set, you definitely don't have to get the most expensive one out there, but maybe don't get the cheapest one out there either, because I don't think I would have kept working with this set for a lot longer. I was actually looking into buying knitting needles when my grandma gifted me all of her old ones. So I have been knitting with these needles mostly. This is a metal needle with some kind of a plastic cable, and this is what most of my needles look like. Some of them are plastic, I'm sure of. Some of them have different cables. They're all by different brands. They're all mismatched, but it works, you know. So I'm not going to spend money on a matching pretty interchangeable needle set that comes in a case if I have all of the sizes and all of the cable lengths already at home. For the material of the needles, a lot of people recommend wood, which I understand because it's probably a bit nicer to hold in your hands. And I've also seen people complain that the metal makes little noises when you knit, which personally I've never really noticed. It's not very loud to me, but that's dependent on the person. The only real difference is that on metal, obviously stitches slide more easily than on wood. And for me, that's a feature at this point. That's just what I'm used to in my knitting, and that's what I expect. when I knit my next stitch. So when I knit with wooden needles, it feels a bit slow to me, whereas when you've knitted with wooden needles always, it might feel a little slippery on the metal needles. So that really just comes down to personal preference. You can get a good result with either material. I will say that for some fibers, some needle materials work better than others. I've worked with an alpaca silk mix in the past that was very, very slippery by itself already, so working that on metal needles just added to that and made it very easy for stitches to fall off my needles and me to lose them. So that was not the most practical, and that would have maybe worked better with wooden needles, whereas a yarn that has a lot of grip already might work better on the metal needles. Sometimes you will also find recommendations and patterns for what needle material to use. I've only seen this once, so it's not the most common thing, and in that case the recommendation was to use a metal needle, which I already had anyways. I don't necessarily think I would go out of my way to buy wooden needles for a project if the pattern was specifically recommending that, but then I would have to live with the result being slightly different. So that's just a trade-off I would do in that case. In my knitting, I've actually found that the material of the cable matters much more than the material of the knitting needle, which might be a hot take because I've never heard anybody say that before. But starting out on this cable was really unhelpful. It halted my knitting experience quite a bit because this is just, it's impractical. It's not bending, you know, it's like so stiff. And I had one more needle at home at that time that I had bought separately, and that was this one. And to this day, I still think this is the most perfect cable material. It's very bendy, as you can see. It does support all kinds of small circumferences. You can actually knit magic loop on this. I have these needles. These are from my grandma, and this is most of the needles that I have. And this is okay. It's not the best. This is also bendy, so that's good, but it kind of holds its shape very well. So when I roll them up to store them away, I just do it like that, which is, I guess, the common way you would store away knitting needles. I'm not that good at it, obviously. Well, you can maybe already see the issue. The cable develops a bit of a mind of its own because it lays like this and then it stays in shape when you take it out. So it's not always the most practical to work with. Sometimes there'll be like a curve in it and the yarn will kind of get stuck. So I found that this material works the best, but it's all just a different kind of plastic, so I don't know. I would just say make sure that the cable isn't super stiff. That has not worked very well for me. Other than the normal circulars, I don't have a ton of different needles. I do have a few small circulars, which I guess is also just circulars, just smaller. So they have a very tiny cable, so you can knit small circumferences in the round. And that's relatively practical, I would say. If you really dislike doing techniques like magic loop, I would say it's worth it to get. They can't be used in that many cases, I've found. So for sleeves, I still will have the problem quite commonly that a 40-centimeter cable is too long, but then the 23-centimeter cable of the short circular is way too small. So I would kind of need an in-between. The small circulars do work well for socks and they work well for cuffs. They are a bit hard on the hands to work with because you can only really hold them with your fingers because they're so tiny. So you can't really support the needle with your hand as well, which is a bit tiring after some time. So they're not always the most practical, but I am still glad I tried them at least. The other option is to do small circumferences on double-pointed needles, which is, I guess, the most common way of doing it. I don't have that many double-pointed needles just because I would have to get like 4 or 5 of them of each size again. And so far I haven't really needed to. I found workarounds with like magic loop or short circulars or, I don't know, just slipping stitches back and forth instead of sliding my needle through wherever it was necessary. So maybe you don't need double pointed needles. They will be recommended a lot of the time. So if you're somebody who doesn't want to go out and do a bunch of extra research on how to figure something out with circular needles, it is maybe a necessity. It is definitely possible to do it without, but it's always good to at least keep a few around, I would say. I want to try knitting with them a little bit more in the future, just to see how I like that, because so far the knitting small circumferences is still something, I don't necessarily struggle with it, but it's never the most fun part, and I don't think it will ever be the most fun part. I'm just trying to find the most fun way to do the least fun part, if that makes sense. So I've tried magic loop, that's okay now. I've tried traveling loop, hated that. I've tried the short circulars, they are alright. So I would just like to try doing double pointed needles more to figure out if that is more than okay. For yarns, there are maybe two different schools of thought. I belong to the one where you pick your project first and then you buy a yarn for that and then you use the yarn for that project, and that is how this is, my stash. This is basically all of the yarn that I have, and this is mostly leftovers from projects that I once finished. There are also a bunch of people who like to buy yarn without any specific project in mind and then come up with the project later. So they draw more inspiration from the fiber or from the colors, while I feel like I focus more on the finished object when deciding what to make next. So how much yarn you should keep around really comes down to your personal making process. I don't know if it's always the most sensible to keep buying yarn and buying yarn and buying yarn if you can't keep up with making something with all of that yarn. Obviously, it's nice to have a little bit of a yarn store at home. I would also like that, but it's just not the most practical. If you're somebody who keeps a whole room of yarn at home, please tell me how do you deal with that? Isn't that so much inventory management, and do you know everything that you have? It's fascinating to me, to be honest. I would like to know more about that. When it comes to what yarns you should buy, I would argue that for knitwear, it is worth it to do animal and plant fibers and not synthetics. If you invest so much time and effort into making something, then it should really be its most wearable version in the end. Obviously, that is a little bit pricier than knitting with synthetics. I have found that with yarns, you really don't pay for the brand as much as in other areas of life. So if you spend more money on yarn, you will usually also get a higher quality yarn. That being said, I work with a mix of more budget-friendly options and more expensive options, and you will get a good result with either one as long as you make sure that the fiber that you pick is appropriate for the item that you're making. If you're trying to find better materials for a good price, reselling websites like eBay or Facebook Marketplace usually are a good place to go to. Thrift stores, you can also sometimes find either yarn or you can find sweaters that you can unravel that have a good fiber composition, so that would be places to go to. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with using synthetic fibers if that's all you can afford, or if that's what you prefer to work with or wear, that is totally fine. For me, I just think that yes, it is more expensive to knit with an animal fiber, but I've found that for me it's worth it to spend a little bit more money on the yarn because I get time doing my hobby out of it, but I also get a finished clothing item out of it that is then higher quality than what I would usually find in a store. For patterns, I buy all patterns that are there on Ravelry. I find it quite practical to have everything in my library there, have it all in one place, be able to re-download it from different devices. So that's just what I found works best, and I will only buy the pattern if I'm also ordering yarn for it and casting it on. I know that some people will just buy a pattern that they like with the intention of maybe making it at some point and just having it in their library, which is obviously a good way to support your favorite designers. But it's also quite nice to just keep some patterns around. I have a pattern book as well. This is it. This is Veronica Lindberg's first book, Knit This. And I've only made one sweater out of there, but I still find it very practical to keep a bunch of patterns around because I also self-draft a lot, and sometimes it's just nice to have a bit of a description of a certain technique that you need to freshen up on, or to have a collection of different construction styles you can refer back to. I also like to browse through there for yarn inspiration if I have a pattern I want to make and a gauge and I don't quite know where to go yarn-wise. I like to look through there and see if there's something similar. So that's just kind of practical, but it's obviously not a necessity. You can figure out all of these things with just buying the patterns you're actually using. And then lastly, it is pretty clear that for knitting you need needles, you need yarn, you maybe need a pattern. What is not always as clear is which of these notions that everybody's always talking about you need to actually get and carry around. And I have a little pouch for them, and I would warmly recommend my little pouch system to you because it's working great and I love it. This is my little pouch that I have for all of my knitting notions. It is just a small wallet. You can use anything else. You can use a pencil case, you can make one, you can use something you already have at home. And this holds anything I might need while I'm knitting. I keep this on my desk at home, so it's always in reach, and when I'm leaving and I'm taking a project with me, I will just throw this in with the project. so that in case I need any of these items while I'm on the go, I have them with me, and everything is always in there. It's very good. What I keep in here is, firstly, I keep a small pair of scissors in the back, because sometimes you need to cut your yarn and it's not very practical to sit on the train and do it with your house keys, I've found. I also keep a measuring tape, because sometimes patterns will say continue until you have this many centimeters or inches or whatever, and I like this one. It's not one of the cool ones that like spring back into the little container by themselves, but this is very small and it fits in here very well, and I already had it at home. I also keep in the back here, this is my little unorganized part of it, just scrap yarn. Just, I don't know, when I do a long tail cast on and I have a bunch left over, I just put it in here. And this is what I use to put my stitches on hold, if I ever need to put my stitches on hold. There are like specific cables that you can buy for that, which is maybe even practical when you're trying to try something on and then put it back on the needles easily. I found that this also works. I like to use this ugly green so I can find my stitches again. And that was already it for the outside. I have some stuff inside as well. First of all, inside of here I have a tapestry needle, because I need to weave in my ends sometimes or sew something together. That also happens. I do have some of these needle stoppers that you can put on the tip of your needle to keep your stitches in place so they don't fall off. This came with this cheap interchangeable set that I bought, and I've been using it very occasionally when I'm working with something really slippery or I have a way too short cable for the amount of stitches, which also happens. And in these cases, I have found them semi-practical. They do also fall off of most needle sizes, to be honest, and I wouldn't buy them if I hadn't gotten them for free. And the main thing I keep in here is stitch markers. And I don't have any fancy stitch markers. I just have these, how do I show those? These very basic ones. Help. These ones that you can find everywhere. I do get the appeal of having fun stitch markers. I think if I ordered something and they came as a little extra, I would be very happy about them. I don't really want to buy them because I find these quite practical. I like that they are lightweight. I like that they are so small, so they're never in the way. I like that you can just slide them on your needle like this, but I like that you can also open them and put them in between your stitches when they're already on the needle. The only downside I've found to those is that they break after a while. So this little section here that you can open, I've had a couple break off this plastic part here, because this is just where it's the weakest and gets the most movement. So they have a limited lifespan, and maybe something out of metal that is a little more sturdy would be better. I would, however, always pay attention to this feature that you can clip them open and closed. I find that I forget putting in stitch markers quite often, and then I want to put them in later, or sometimes I just want to mark off certain sections in the pattern that aren't really required to be marked with a stitch marker. I also like that they have different colors, so it doesn't always match the project the best. I try to do my best to use the matching colors, but it's just practical to see which section you're on. I have, I think, one red one and one yellow one that I always use at the beginning of round marker, and then the other colors I have multiples of, so I'll just put them in to mark a sleeve or a saddle or whatever. And clearly for everything that I keep in this pouch, you can buy a fancier and prettier version of it, which is great if you want to do that. Absolutely go for it. I also think it's very cute. I just want to say it's not necessary to spend money on these things. It does make your knitting look a little bit more aesthetic maybe, but this also works. You also get a great result out of this. Oh, and I also wanted to show my project bags. These are my project bags. These are freezer bags. I like them because they come in different sizes. They are clear, so I can see what's in them. They can be closed, so they are sealed off against any outside disturbances like moss or rain when I take a project with me, or me spilling my water bottle. They work. I will say that when you put knitting needles in them, they sometimes poke through the plastic, which, you know, it's not the most practical thing, but these are very easily replaceable too, and cheap. So that is what I organize all of my yarn in, and that is also what I put my projects in when I leave the house. At home, I like to put them in these little containers or baskets that you can see up there. I just think that looks a little prettier than having the plastic bags lying around. Obviously, project bags, very fun thing. Obviously you can buy them. It's a great gift for people who knit as well, I think. Is it necessary? Absolutely not. So to conclude a little chat here, if you're somebody who's just starting up with knitting, or somebody who doesn't have the budget for all the fancy extras, or someone who doesn't have the space to store all of the fancy extras anywhere, or like me, somebody who just doesn't like to keep a bunch of unnecessary stuff around them, I hope I could provide some guidance on what is necessary to get and what is just an extra that is a fun thing to have that you can absolutely go for if you want to and that's important to you. And I hope this served as a bit of a reminder that you can still knit and you can still have great project outcomes without having all of the fanciest and the newest tools and notions. Definitely let me know in the comments if you have any other knitting essentials that I didn't mention, or if you want to make a case for the fancy stitch markers and to tell me why they are absolutely necessary in your opinion. Maybe I'm looking for an excuse to get some. I hope that whatever you had on your needles while we were chatting turns out very well. My swatch is looking pretty promising. I just measured the stitch gauge and it looks like it might match up. Obviously not blocked yet, so we will need to take care of that. And I will see you next time.